A pleasure to meet all at last, and welcome back to some more of Nerf Secrets Revealed Tears of the Clown. So, happy 2024, everybody. I can imagine this year is going to be full of some pretty eventful things, including some not so savory moments, which I know are going to happen this year. So, no need to dwindle on that subject though, because as per usual, Tears of the Clown is about ranking Nerf blasters and not much of anything else. So as per usual, here we are, shrunken down to this corner where the tier list is up here occupying the rest of the frame. And what we're gonna do for this lovely occasion is talk a bit about the new, well, not so new, Super Soakers. Now, of course, we know that Super Soakers are still around today, so maybe I might talk a bit more about the newer Super Soakers, but for now, why don't we kick things off with the 2011 series of Super Soakers, since after all, they've been around for a long time, especially since being invented in the late 80s by Lonnie Johnson, a well-known engineer and army worker. So, since he was the original Super Soaker creator, he's had a lot of innovations, and Hasbro was really able to upcharge the level of innovation and creativity within the series. And so, especially in 2011 through 2014 is where I've had big memories of the series. And what we're gonna do here is we're gonna kick things off with the Arctic Shock. As you can see, this blaster is a bit basic for what it is. And as the name implies, you can actually load in the large capacity tank with ice, allowing for the water to be extremely freezing by any accounts. But unfortunately, while this was mostly the starting point for a new series of Super Soakers, it kind of falls short for a couple of things. It has that weird bulk to it. Granted, it probably was necessary since they did, after all, have to have a way for them to be able to work with trying to fit a large amount of water while also having enough spare room for some ice. Now, while I'm not exactly all too familiar with this whole series, I've had plenty of experience with the good majority of these blasters. The Arctic Shock might have been a good starting point for what it tried to do, but there actually are better blasters with the ability to carry ice inside their magazines or tanks. And so, unfortunate as it might sound to some of you, we're putting this up at D. Next, the Bottle Blitz. This was actually a blaster that, again, had its own unique innovation. This is one of those blasters that would allow you to stick the nose of the blaster into a vestibule and then simply pull back on the grip. The blaster would automatically fill up with water thanks to a special pressurized chamber, which basically drops, allowing water to easily flow through. A suction, basically, or vacuum effect would take place. And then, upon finding your target, you simply squeeze it forward with that nice pressure from the rubber O-ring, which prevents any leakage of water going in from the chamber to behind the ring for the blaster. Unfortunately, while I have noticed a number of things here, there actually are some rip-offs of this exact blaster, and this design has been used countless times by a lot of toy companies. So, for the fact that Nerf was a bit late to this type of game, and on top of that, the Bottle Blitz was unfortunately expensive in contrast to what we've seen from a lot of these other types of water guns, the Bottle Blitz, for Nerf's official usage of this design and this particular functionality, with a pressure chamber that would allow water to flow through and then squirt out depending on how much pressure you put into the chamber from the blaster itself. This unfortunately is going to have to go down to D, just the same as the Arctic Shock. Both at least had their own unique innovations, and we can give them the benefit of the doubt that they likely could have done a lot better after some time had come by. So, here we go. The third blaster that would come out in the series is the Hydro Cannon. Oh boy. This blaster itself really is what you call an impressive feat of engineering. First of all, this is a blaster that could fill up with over 2 cups full of water inside its tank, which is near the back of the blaster. Not exactly the best form of weight distribution, but in any case though, probably another big thing about it is its own exclusive attachment, which is basically a scope that simply slides onto the side of the blaster. Multiple tactical rails are actually used, in fact, on this blaster, so you could probably slide on whatever option you have with you. There's no stock attachments or anything, as other blasters would have later on. Probably the biggest thing though about this blaster is the fact that it utilizes a pressure chamber, much like what we've seen with the bottle blades. But through a foregrip on the bottom, you can actually pump it back and forth to build up a lot of air pressure, and by pulling on the trigger after having enough pressure built inside, it unleashes a massive wave of water. Basically, a hydro cannon in your hands would make you unbelievably formidable to your foes, as a large amount of water would definitely soak the likes of whoever is in the way. Now, while that is an impressive feat of engineering, unbelievably so, there are some drawbacks to this. Most hydro cannons, even when new, had a bit of a tendency to leak. And as I've mentioned before, the water choice in terms of where it's stored within the tank was not necessarily the best choice, as having the back end full of the water with over 2 cups of the capacity worth would technically hinder the likes of weight distribution. Even with the likes of using some force to tilt it downwards by keeping your hand on the foregrip, used to build pressure into the back of the chamber, unleashing the water by pulling on the trigger. And speaking on the trigger, the hand grip is pretty small. Granted, a number of Nerf blasters have had this feature where a small hand grip was indeed common. But with most blasters that we've seen, like the Knife Finder, the Jolt, the Reflex, or even the, let's say, Mega Big Shock, there's just a time where small hand grips are indeed necessary for smaller size blasters. But this is a really big blaster for what it is. A huge Super Soaker made to be like a portable cannon. Almost like that of an RPG or something. But it doesn't really fire rockets. It fires ginormous streams of water. So the trigger obviously is too big for the small hand grip, which alone, that's a pretty big problem. So you got leakage that can happen as a result of the O-ring from the seal not functioning properly, which was actually on most hydro cannons when they were new out of box. Or of course, you could have yourself the problem of uneven weight distribution from the water being nestled all the way into the back before you build air pressure by using the foregrip. And on top of all that, a really small hand grip and large trigger, definitely not appropriate proportions as opposed to what we've seen from a majority of Nerf blasters. Especially in more recent years, they know not to make this kind of flub. And so, while it does a great job in many ways, being the most powerful and most exedicative of all of the Super Soaker blasters that we've had in the series so far, it's unfortunately going to have to be put down at C. So, not a great place to be in. Then we come up to Hydro Fury. What can I say about this one? Not a whole lot. And that's just the thing. A number of blasters unfortunately have slipped from people's minds, and some might not own this blaster whatsoever. The fact I've hardly even heard about this is one thing, but I am going to try and give it a chance just because this might actually be a gem. Unfortunately, upon looking at this, it's not so good. Basically, it's supposed to work like that of most other Super Soakers. Simply build in pressure and fire. But while it does what it tried to do, it unfortunately falls flat from a few different flaws that are within. Some flaws I could identify with are some not so appropriate proportions in terms of the hand grip compared to the rest of the blaster. And then of course you have the likes of a mag strike like pump system, which is similar in shape. But the thing is, with a small capacity and small pressure that could be allowed, quite similar in a ways to the Secret Strike AS1. I can't entirely recommend it. So I wouldn't exactly point it out as being a terrible blaster, but for its cheapness and the fact that they even had this included in some deals for fast food industries all over the nation, technically wouldn't make this a worthwhile choice. And so D is unfortunately where this might have to go. So this, of course, will bring us to the Point Break. Basically, when we start to get into some more familiar territory with the Super Soaker lineage that we've came for in the 2011 to 2014 run of Super Soaker itself. Basically, the Point Break is a simple usage of having a slide pump on the bottom. Pull it back and forth several times in order to build up enough pressure, squeeze the trigger to fire, and that's just pretty much it. As simple as it is, I wouldn't exactly point this out to be that bad of a blaster. It actually has been rebranded and repainted many times. Mostly because its simple usage, functionality, its generous capacity, as a matter of fact, I feel like is what can really allow this to be an accomplishment. And then of course, you have yourself a comfortable foregrip, the usage of air pressure is the means to build up water, not to mention the flow is pretty long. Of course, once you build enough pressure in there and squeeze that trigger, that's actually where you can find out that it's actually a good blaster for what it is. Not exactly a great piece in mind, but it does what it can. And the fact that it's been recolored many times obviously does show that it's had potential over the years. And people have been talking about it in many ways. So I guess with that in mind, C is where this one can go. And next up, the Rattler, another air pressured blaster. And I feel like this one might have similar merits to that of what the Point Break had, but I feel like that with all things considered, this one hasn't been talked about as much as most of the others so far, but yet it still does the best that it probably could. And so, C is where this one can go, just the same as Point Break. However, as far as 2012 and 2013 would go, oh boy, the Scatter Blast. The Scatter Blast. Now, this is indeed where we're really at the best, especially when the Scatter Blast is often seen as the most common piece when it comes to talking about Super Soaker products as a whole. Basically, this blaster operates much like with the Point Break, but unlike building up air pressure before firing, this doesn't even have a trigger. And of course we know that some blasters did not have triggers simply because of having the usage of the air pump down below as a unit that you would grab onto, pull forward, and then back. You would generate pressure by simply allowing a feed system to allow water to flow through up to the barrel and then come out firing water at your opponents. And the Scatter Blast not only delivered in that in such a proficient way, but oh man, I remember being at a quarry back in 2012 when the Scatter Blast itself first came around, and oh man, it sure was an effective blaster what it was. It could actually fire well over 50 feet, which is awesome. That's definitely a range we don't see from a lot of the blasters. And maybe with this in mind, the fact that at close range, in that quarry run, I was hit so many times with the Scatter Blast, it hurt, actually. Most likely because of how much pressure you could build up within the blaster. Tapping into the pressure at its fullest allows you to simply hit your opponents really hard. And like I just said, it was crazy. This is such an amazing blaster that I cannot recommend it enough to anyone who could be new to Super Soakers by this point. So, okay. S ranking for the Scatter Blast. Need I say more about it? Probably not. But here we go. We're going to move on to the Shot Blast. Now, the Shot Blast is simply put one of those pieces of mind. And I do feel like that while the Shot Blast wasn't exactly as big of a blaster as the majority of which, I will at least go so far to say that the Shot Blast itself might just be one of those that you might be looking forward to. If you're looking forward to go into the past, basically, as far as the Soaker Wars series would go, when Super Soakers had its more classic styling with that specific red and blue italic sort of font to it, then I would seriously consider the Shot Blast by all means. Although there was the 2011 to 2014 lineage with that specific color scheme of white, midnight blue, and orange. And this, of course, did come along in that color scheme, but there was also the red and blue versions. Those color schemes, of course, that associated with the Soaker Wars series. Above all else, no matter the color scheme, it's pretty simple to operate. It has a stock similar to that of the Raider CS35, and of course, was simply done by the usage of a water pump down below. This pump would feed water directly into the system and allow it to eventually fire up. After a few strokes, you could simply allow the water to easily flow out in such a pretty proportionate manner. And the fact is that you could actually get pretty far, and that water could actually shoot at some solid distances. While it's not exactly perfect at what it is, I'd say being at least a follow-up in regards to the 2011 to 2014 series, despite being a more older model in contrast when it was first introduced, the Shot Blast is still pretty awesome. Having its own exclusive stock is one thing, having good functionality is another. Having good handling of it, high capacity of it, and a good amount of other merits will definitely put this up high on the scale. And so, with that in mind, B is where it's going to go. This is where we move on to another blaster, the Tornado Strike. Oh boy. What can I say about this one? Well, it does have a stock that's exactly like what the Shot Blast and Raider had, but despite this, I wouldn't exactly go so far to say that it's more of a negative. It's fine that if it has itself a stock that is similar in a way as to the likes of what we've seen from other blasters, or is even the same exact design. Probably the biggest thing though about the Tornado Strike is its firing technique. It uses a rotating barrel, and is also one of the first Super Soaker blasters to utilize its own magazine, which of course was common by this point, as several Super Soaker blasters in this exact lineage would have their own water magazines. You could simply fill them up with a cup and a half worth of water, or 275 milliliters. And basically, this would be just enough water to make you last for some time. Unless, of course, you want to stock up on multiple clips. Like with some of the blasters I've mentioned, this one doesn't have its own trigger. And, of course, that's just simply because, like with some of the blasters, it simply uses a feed system through the various of the pumps down below the barrel. And this pump, like the others, generates a flow of water that can eventually flow outward, depending on how many strokes are made. However, though, there is a nifty innovation in this one that really makes it stand out from the likes of the rest. It has a rotator. Like I said, this rotator generates a spiraling effect. Having two holes in it and combining the two together does allow for that specific tornado-like appearance, which is epic by any means. And there's plenty of videos that showcase this exact spiraling action in motion, and it's ridiculously awesome. So, you know what? This is just where I really draw the line here. Super Soakers were insanely good by this point. And so, with that in mind, it's an A ranking for this. So, of course, I wouldn't exactly go so far to say that it does the best that it could. But here we go. The XP215. Yeah, that's basically its name. The XP215 was basically a layering project at first, before eventually having its own place within the likes of the 2011 to 2014 lineage. And as such, what it basically is simply put a rather simple blaster to work with, having itself an air pressure tank and a small trigger on the bottom. It's more of that portable size where it's small enough to the point where you could probably carry it around in a bag or probably even your pocket if you're that desperate, or by any means, whatever you can probably find. But anyways though, while the XP215 had itself the merit to being smaller and easier to handle, and having itself air pressure, which can generally be of reliance in some ways if you're trying to be, let's say, efficient. Who really knows? But I wouldn't exactly go so far to call it a great blaster for what it is. Despite being an older blaster, and despite being able to carry over to other lineages relating to the Super Soaker lineup, it's probably not best for action by this point. It probably gets a C at this point, based on my overall rankings. After finding a lot of things about Super Soakers though, I guess if there's one blaster that we can definitely consider worthwhile in that tiny size, yet somewhat limited capacity by any means, the Microburst would probably be what I consider to be the best of all the smaller sized ones. Of all the smaller Super Soaker blasters that existed, the Microburst did one thing only. It shot a big epic stream, and quite a far range too, similar to how the Shot Blast would work. It was a pretty strong stream too, much like what the Scatter Blast would offer, and as such, despite having only 2 fluid ounces for a capacity, it still is going to get itself an A ranking. Yeah, you might think I'm crazy, but it is a small blaster after all, so do expect some limitations to be made. After all, when people found out the Jolt and Reflex were things considered for Nerf, a lot of people didn't like the idea of not having a high capacity. But a high capacity blaster or low capacity blaster doesn't exactly matter because some people might actually prefer that option. Next, why don't we talk a bit about the Flash Blast? Yes, this was a blaster that's very similar in build to the Scout or even the Zombie Strike, Side Strike basically. Basically a top slide on the top that runs throughout the whole length of the blaster. The real big difference though is that this is a blaster with an internal magazine for water. Its slide pump is meant to generate air pressure so that way water flows through the chamber. And upon pulling the trigger, it's supposed to release a small burst of water. Now, I do feel like that this could be helpful because unlike with the air pressure vents that were made possible by usage of a pump system, the usage of a slide on the top as a means to automatically feed water into the chamber into a reasonable amount of capacity per firing sequence. I would say in that regard, it does pretty well at what it tries to do, trying to be more efficient. But maybe, not always, it'd be a good idea to have this sort of innovation in mind. And maybe that's the whole reason why I'm officially going to give this a C ranking. Not exactly a bad blaster, but it probably isn't something that's totally worthwhile if you're looking for something that's higher capacity, or at least having some way of keeping water handy when you need it the most. Next, we're going to move on to the Shockwave. Yes, the Shockwave is definitely another one of those blasters that's magazine fed, and like with the Tornado Strike and a few others I've mentioned, simply uses a feeding system directly from a pump that's below the barrel. Yeah, I could say it's by this point that it does start to feel a bit old. But the fact is, it actually is a really good blaster for what it is. If you can basically give it a chance, then just simply give it a chance. This blaster has itself its own magazine, much like the Tornado Strike, being able to carry about 9 ounces of water, pretty much. But this sort of piston system, as it's been known as, does in fact allow for it to have itself a nice usage of water every time you intend on using it. And I would say that while this HAMP style is not exactly the perfect innovation for what it is, it still does allow for it to be a formidable blaster. Anyone who's looking forward to getting a compact blaster with this exact type of firing system while still retaining the magazine options can definitely look forward to purchasing this. It's a lot cheaper than what most other larger Super Soakers were like back in the day. And with all that in mind, the encompassing pros and cons do allow this to get a B ranking as a result. Now, this is basically where we get into probably the biggest turn up of this exact lineage. This is where we get into the trilogy known as the Storm series of blasters. While it's not exactly its own standalone series of Super Soaker related blasters, we're going to kick things off by talking a bit about the Thunderstorm. Yes, basically. The Thunderstorm was actually the first big step into creating a series of fully automatic Super Soaker blasters. By usage of AA batteries, you could actually allow the Thunderstorm to fire off water automatically. Squeeze the trigger, and there it goes outside of the barrel. It comes with its own capacity clip, 9 ounces in particular, so to speak, and it even has the option for you to use whatever tactical rail or stocks that you might have on hand. Now, some people aren't exactly fans of this series of blasters. Mixing electricity and water certainly would prove to be dangerous. But the fact is that Nerf was actually able to handle this whole thing with ease. And of all things considered, I haven't had a single time where I was actually electrocuted by this whole thing. And you know what? I even recall some fond times where I actually used to water some plants by using a Thunderstorm from the roof. Yeah, seriously. I made a nice little rain from above and managed to spray down an entire garden full of jalapeno plants and make them grow nice and proficient, enough for the jalapenos to be amazing in taste. That is a memory that I hope never goes away. And so, the Thunderstorm automatically goes up to the B ranking. Now here we go, Electrostorm. This was the smallest of the bunch, and also the lowest capacity of the bunch. Still required the usage of batteries, 4 of which just to fully operate. Of course, since it's much lower capacity, that itself hurts it pretty badly, because after all, some people might be expecting to use this for long periods of time. And you definitely would have to constantly refill it with water. Unless if you had some sort of bottle or something on hand, which would allow for you to refill the tank over and over and over and over and over again. Of course, some people have found it to be somewhat dysfunctional, even with batteries. Most likely because either they're dead or they're off-brand. But naturally, I'm not exactly going to go all out full force based on speculations from other people. I'm just simply going to look at it through my own perspective. And so, the Electrostorm, simply not having a good enough capacity for something that's battery powered, is going to unfortunately end up in the C ranking. Just the same as with a few other blasters. Now, the biggest of the bunch, and also something that really invented a number of things, was the Lightning Storm. That's right. It reuses the same exact design as the Thunderstorm, but in return, it comes with the first ever drum magazine. That's right, a drum magazine capable of holding 37 fluid ounces. That's over 4 times the amount of the standard clip. And so, that alone is an impressive feat. It's not exactly that heavy as some people would suspect. We also can't forget that it comes with its own exclusive stock with a lightning bolt molded in the center, meant to add a bit of extra sturdiness. And there's even a shield attachment for the top, a means to block incoming water. The same exact sort of negatives were made about this blaster having the ability to use battery power, which is electricity combined with water. Some people thought it was a ridiculous idea, but I've always dismissed that type of claim. It worked very well in my own possible way. So what exactly would I want to say anything negative about the Lightning Storm itself? The answer is, I don't. I don't at all have anything bad to say about this. And that's really something. I have, of course, talked a lot of great things about blasters out there, and a lot of A or S rankings across multiple lineups have taken place here in Tears of the Clown. And so, being that there's already 2 of them, why don't we go on ahead and make it a triple thread by adding the Lightning Storm to the A ranking. So basically, we have the Microburst, Tornado Strike, and now the Lightning Storm are all in the A ranking, with the Scatterblast so far being the best that the Super Soaker lineup in this exact 2011 to 2014 lineage has had to offer thus far. When it came down to all of this, well, the series would unfortunately meet itself an end. However, there were 2 more blasters that they would have as a final push out before they would make their transition to what is known as a more recent lineage, which had started by 2014. Because at the end of 2013, while the series came to its own end, there were 2 more blasters to it. Another Arctic Shock. Basically, the same blaster with the same exact type of functionality. But I just simply refer to this as an Arctic Wave because it's a different blaster design while it tries to retain the exact name that the Arctic Shock had. So Arctic Wave is what I called this. Of course it's different, not just from design, but it also has a giant magazine, a really big one, possibly rivaling the likes of the Lightning Storm's Drum Mag. But as we've established previously, the Arctic Shock could hold ice cubes due to its large built-in tank, while this drum magazine, in particular for the Arctic Wave, is also capable of holding ice cubes. As a matter of fact, the seal is a little wider in contrast to the magazine's typical seal, which is around 1 inch in diameter. So this is more than 3 times larger, for the sole purpose of allowing ice cubes of any size to fit inside the tank prior to pouring the water within it. And so, being that it's a much higher capacity magazine as opposed to what we've seen from the 37 fluid ounce magazine of the Lightning Storm, that itself is a nifty innovation. It utilizes the same type of hemp system as we've seen from most other blasters. While hemp is not exactly the best thing we could have seen, it definitely works in this situation because with high capacity, you're guaranteed to last for quite a while. And then of course, there's other bits about it, like the usage of stock attachments and tactical rails, which are definitely well at hand. Therefore, I feel like that in contrast to the Arctic Shock, the Arctic Wave is much higher on the ranking. Ranking at B. That's just simply where we'll put that. So, sorry to the original, because the new guy's definitely done better. That's definitely a step up, for the record. But then the final blaster of this exact lineage before they moved on to a new series of blasters, beginning with the likes of Barrage, Double Drench, and whatnot. I'll talk about those blasters at some other point in time, but in any case, the Switch Shot, which is also a name that we have previously established. I mean, it's technically an N-Strike title, belonging to a blaster that operates similar to the Knife Finder EX3, but with the blue version that comes with its own red scope that was exclusive to the Nintendo Wii game known as Nerf N-Strike Elite. A couple years before the actual N-Strike Elite lineup came, but in any case, I'm also renaming this blaster, calling it the Switchback. It would only make sense. So, of course, the Switchback it is. And basically, this is really where the name Switch Shot would have actually have come in handy. After all, this is the only blaster by far to have multiple forms of firing. Seriously, this blaster has a mist option, a double blast, a spread blast, and a single blast. 4 types of firing methods, all thanks to a barrel where the tip can oscillate clockwise or counterclockwise until it locks into place with series of holes in varying degrees, allowing you to basically choose whichever firing mode you desire. Not to mention, it's the first to have a banana clip. Now this banana clip is over twice the capacity of the standard rectangle clips, so that itself is amazing. It has the same color palette as we've seen on the Arctic Wave, with the inclusion of bright blue as an accent to the midnight blue, which was present on all the blasters. So the Super Soaker 2011 to 2014 lineage had definitely reached its climax, but with the inclusion of the Arctic Wave and the Switchback being usage for the final leg of the lineage before they would move on with a brand new series, a new lineage beginning in 2014 with the Barrage and other blasters. I would say, at least for being the final blaster in the series, They definitely hammered it with the switchback. And so this is where we have our final A ranking for this tier list. And would you look at that? Looks like we have quite a success here. Not all the blasters proved to be worthwhile though, and I'm sure that some of you guys probably won't be too excited to hear about what I could probably say about other blaster lineups. But nevertheless, I'm practically open at this point to seeing what we could do for the near future. And I do hope that Super Soakers stick around for a pretty long time. I just know for a fact some people might not exactly like a bunch of them, but the 2011 to 2014 series, this exact lineage with that distinct color palette, and its many exciting innovations for the Super Soaker blasters entirely, ever since Lonnie Johnson first put them to action in the late 80s. I'd say we definitely have a good chance to see some bigger and possibly better things go down with this whole series as a whole. And because it's been around for a long time, Super Soakers has definitely been a king of the water gun craze. And while they might not be super big nowadays, they still are a pretty big staple in most toy stores. Target, Walmart, Meijer, you name it. Lots of departments keep a hold of them by any accounts. And so, with that in mind, it's impressive we have a lot of A rankings and even S rankings, with the Scatter Blast currently being at the highest point of all of them, being closely followed behind the likes of the Tornado Strike and Switchback. And so, that's definitely what you call a successful tier list. But I sure do hope to have a lot more by all accounts. And so, if you want to see more, go down to my channel. Make sure that you like, subscribe, comment, follow me on social media, and well, wherever you can find me is probably more appropriate in this context. And stay on the Hollywood side if you'd like to see more of this stuff.